Hello, everyone. I'm Kemal Pinarbasi. Thank you very much for coming to this presentation. Today, I'm going to present you Transboundary and Ecosystem-based spatial planning. I just finalized my PhD, and this topic and this presentation I presented in a couple of European conferences, but there are many un-European participants I'm seeing. So to know who I am, that I just did an Erasmus Mundus master degree on maritime spatial planning. And then later, I did my PhD studies in University of Basque Country while I'm working in Asti Tecnalia in Spain. And I just finalized my PhD studies on July. So from today, I'm still looking for opportunities, and any future opportunities, if you can let me know. Today, I'm going to talk about Bay of Biscay and a recent study which was published in Marine Policy, Transboundary Works and Key Issues for Transboundary and Ecosystem-based Marine Spatial Planning. So we can pass the slide. Kelly, next slide, if you can. Yes. So, as we all know, ocean is providing many benefits to us. However, we know that its resources are limited, and there are many activities taking place in this limited space. So, due to increasing needs of us, such as food or energy, there are every day more activities in ocean. So, this increasing human activities in limited maritime space is making pressure to marine environment. Besides, there are management strategies fostering blue economy, such as blue growth, which is the long-term EU strategy to support sustainable growth in marine and maritime areas as a whole. So it is a maritime contribution to achieve the goals of Europe 2020 strategy for smart, sustainable, and inclusive growth. So blue growth is aiming to foster high potential sectors such as aquaculture, coastal tourism, marine biotechnology, energy, and mining. And then in the same time, there are environmental EU directives to manage these activity-based pressures, such as Marine Strategy Framework Directive, which later I will come. And Marine Strategy Framework Directive, maybe most of us know it, is aiming good environmental status. So competition for ocean space is stressing there's a need for a coherent management and planning. And in this stage, MSP is coming, Marine Spatial Planning is coming. So we can pass the slide. So what is MSP? In the recent presentations, probably you watch Marine Spatial Planning is balancing economic, ecologic, and social dimensions of marine environment, according to Charles Ehler. And we performed a stage analysis. So we defined several stages to understand MSP. And there are 7 stages. There are already other scientists define different MSP stages. For our work, we said that first, we should define the goals, then gathering data, identifying issues. Then we should develop alternative management actions and evaluate these management actions. And finally, we should monitor and evaluate these actions and refine our goals, objectives, and management actions. Yeah, we can pass. So as most of you know, that there's an MSP directive from 2014 from European Union. And according to this directive, countries should follow an ecosystem-based approach while developing their maritime spatial plans. So due to amount of sensitivity of the environment, countries should follow an ecosystem-based approach. But what is an ecosystem-based approach? It is the comprehensive integrated management of human activities based on the best available scientific knowledge about the ecosystem and its dynamics in order to identify and take action on influences which are critical to health of marine ecosystems, thereby achieving sustainable use of ecosystem goods and services and maintenance of ecosystem integrity. So while we are planning, while we are doing our plans, fostering economy and blue growth activities, we should always remember the environment and ecosystem-based approach. We can pass. So here you can pass all if you want, Kelly, that they will appear. So the objective of the directive, Marine Spatial Planning, Maritime Spatial Planning, is to support sustainable development and growth in maritime sectors, applying an ecosystem-based approach. And there is another European Union directive that I mentioned before, the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. It is also aiming to protect marine environment across Europe and to achieve good environmental status. So many countries already define some measures in order to achieve this aim. Since Marine Strategy Framework Directive is a previous directive, so there are many works already done. And we believe that information produced by Marine Strategy Framework Directive can be really beneficial for maritime spatial planning applications. So it can be a great input And in order to have a successful MSP process, a clear visioning should be realized, and an ecologically sound visioning may emphasize how to put ecosystem-based management into practice and how to measure its success. So therefore, in this work, we aim to identify the key issues and challenges in order to raise recommendations for a transboundary ecosystem-based MSP in the Bay of Biscay for achieving socioeconomic and environmental objectives based on a holistic vision of economic, environmental, and social settings and present management practices. So before in the presentations, we already saw with other speakers that are country-based national planning processes. But when we put another country in the game, in this example, you will see right now that France and Spain, things are changing because they're following different methodologies. They implement different measures. So let's see how we handle this. So we can pass. Now, I would like to show you a simple map of Bay of Biscay. In the southern part, there's Spain, and in the northern part, France. So I will try to explain you our example of transboundary MSP for these two countries, which are in the development process of MSP. There's no implemented MSP already. So Bay of Biscay is located in Northeast Atlantic Ocean and positions of the western coast of Europe. It's 40% of its EEZ is in Spain, and 59% of EEZ is in French exclusive economic zone. So total population in these regions are almost 20 million people, and it's equal to 14% of Spain and 18% of French population. So the country is considerably rich. The GDP per capita is 90% of EU average in France and 83% of EU average in Spain regions. So there are many activities, such as traditional ones, fishery, shipping, dredging, aquaculture, and tourism. And there are new activities, such as renewable energy platforms, these wind and wave platforms, energy platforms. In total, it has 175,000 kilometers square surface and 4,800 meter average depth. So now I will show you another map of the way to explain the area. We can pass. So here I would like to show the jurisdictional borders in the Bay of Biscay. In the middle, the black line, you can see the borders of EEZ, exclusive economic zone. As you can see, there is a large continental shelf in front of French coast, this white area, which is so shallow. And on the other hand, Spain has much narrowed continental shelf, and the depth is much higher than France. So there's not large space for specific fishermen, especially for bottom fishermen or some other activities. So there are several activities going on, but there are new activities also. In the north side, you can see Nantes Saint-Nazaire in France. There is a 80 new offshore wind platform is planned. It will be finalized with 480 megawatts. And there are several test areas for wave energy converters. And one of them you can see in Spanish side between Bilbao and San Sebastian, which is the BMAP platform. Both countries are developing their spatial plans, but they are all in consultation stage, so they are checking and revising their plans. So we can pass. Besides, there are several protected areas, Natura 2000 areas that I would like to show, and some of them are located next to the border of two countries. So you can see the northern one in France, which is defined as a big protected area, but when we check the Spanish side, we don't see this area there. So actually, we know that jurisdictional borders are not borders for marine environment. So we believe that both countries should sit together and check the coherence and why these areas are protected. So they should collaborate. And although most of these protected areas do not have management plans, we need a transboundary analysis to see in this kind of regional maritime areas, as it was mentioned in the EU directive. Yeah, we can pass. So in this work, what we did, first, step one, we checked economic, environmental, and social settings of Bay of Biscay to understand the area economically, environmentally, and socially. Then we checked the Marine Strategy Framework Directive implementation and how did they implement this directive, what kind of measures they checked, what kind of conservation practices they checked in two countries. And then we analyzed the strategic objectives and future conditions. And we prepared a big comparison matrix. We put all the objectives that we could identify from both countries for the area, and we compared them. And finally, we tried to identify some critical issues and recommendations for ecosystem-based maritime spatial planning. Yeah, we can pass. Now I would like to show you what are the results that we have identified. So you can see that here there are several program of measures defined according to MSFD descriptors. And we saw that the countries actually were focusing to similar issues as it could be expected since it's a small maritime region. that many countries define, the two countries define measures on biodiversity. Biodiversity is maintained, the first descriptor, and also descriptor 4, which is focusing on elements of food web, ensuring long-term abundance and reproduction. And also the descriptor 6, the seafloor integrity, and descriptor 10, marine litter does not cause harm. But at the same time, we realized that for permanent alteration of hydrogeographical conditions or concentration of contaminants, there were not a lot of measures in both countries. We can continue. So now I would like to show you country by country. So in France, we have seen that they identified 76 measures for MSFT for this area, this specific area. And the focus points were mainly activities like such as fishery, pollution, management plan, MPA, shipping. So the main topics were fishery and pollution, but they defined their measures and how to say the terms that they were using were mainly focusing on the activities. Now we can pass, and I would like to show Spain. So in Spain, we saw that they were more related with marine environmental concerns were exactly written. So for example, the main concern in the measures were restoring and conserving marine ecosystems and marine litter, as we saw in France, spatial protection, research and knowledge, fishing and other exploitation, and extraction of species. Then after checking this program of measures and controlling them, so we can pass Kelly. After comparing these measures, one back. Yeah, we also checked their strategic objectives. We categorized these objectives and saw what are the focus points. So I would like to show you France, how they kind of define their strategic objectives and what were the main issues. So they defined their objectives, but later they went to stakeholders and asked what are the positive and negative impacts of these objectives. So we realized that these objectives will be potentially positive for food webs, commercial species, fish and cephalopods, coastal structures, and benthic habitats topics. But in the same time, there are some negative objectives of these economic objectives. Checking, for example, coastal structures. There are many coastal structures planned in the area. For benthic habitats, these economic objectives will give negative impacts and seabirds. So defining the objectives and going to stakeholders and taking positive and negative issues according to these objectives. I think it's a good methodology. I can advise to other countries to follow this kind of methodology. Yeah, we can pass. We can pass, Kelly. Yes. So finally, after checking all these things, we have defined some specific issues for transboundary and ecosystem-based MSP, and we give some recommendations. So first that we saw, okay, transboundary interactions can cause resource competition. There's a space conflict in the area. And then we saw that there are several new offshore projects can be expected in the Bay, since member states are targeting 32 of renewable energies in its final energy consumption by 2030. So the research should focus on floating technologies and decreasing its environmental impact, and we need to check its economic impact. And then due to its dynamic characteristics of the area, you can see on the right down, marine litter is an important issue. It's a cross-boundary issue, so it's a semi-closed area. Bay of Biscay is an important accumulation area, so the countries should work on it. It can be recommended to perform a comprehensive and cross-border economic environmental risk assessment in the Bay to identify threats and potential magnitudes. And it is recommended to have clear and quantitative objectives, because most of the objectives are mainly qualitative. And there is a need to foster MSP by integration of process leaders, working groups, and responsible authorities. We can pass. So these are the conclusions. As I said, the biodiversity, food web, seafloor integrity, and marine litter were the main issues. And as I said, there's a need to foster MSP. We can pass. So before finishing my presentation, I would like to show you a framework that we prepared and we used in many works that I was working on my PhD thesis. So here on the right upside, you can see socioeconomic issues, which are activities. Blue growth is saying that we should foster this smart, sustainable, and inclusive growth of activities. These activities are creating pressures, and they are changing the state and making impact to environment. On the downside, Europe is trying to give some directives such as Marine Strategy Framework Directive, Water Framework Directive, Habitats and Bird Directive, and trying to protect the environment with program of measures, conservation activities, and to reach good environmental status. So we say that the aim should be sustainable use of marine goods and services through balancing ecological, economic, and social goals. So we can pass, and thank you very much for listening to my presentation. You can reach me from the platform.
Thank you, Kemal, for a very interesting presentation. We will have a question session now, and we will start with a question for Karen. Karen, are you here?
Yep, I'm still here.
Okay, great, thank you. So the question is, most of the developing coastal countries are yet to incorporate ocean education in their primary and secondary curriculum. If we don't provide marine education and knowledge of conservation science to the present generation, we cannot expect future conservation scientists and policymakers. What action can be taken to motivate the government to take action in this regard?
Wow, that's a really complex question. Thank you to whoever posted that question. I guess in response to that, I would throw a question back, which is to say, why are we expecting that it's government's role to ensure that ocean literacy is a thing that young people are having access to? Is it the role of government, or if we're thinking more in the governance frame of mind that I was talking about earlier on, could it be a role for other components of governance, for example, society? As a researcher, I'm very much interested in science communication, and certainly throughout my sort of academic career so far, I've certainly been very engaged in going into schools, chatting with students about different aspects of the marine environment. So perhaps there's a couple of different aspects to that in terms of is it the role of government, and this may be different in different countries in terms of the responsibilities, but is there a role maybe that we can play as researchers in trying to help foster that ocean literacy in young people? And there are some really fabulous programs out there where scientists can actually get engaged with primary schools around the world, for example, where you can actually, give Zoom chats to schools. So it's a really difficult question to answer. How do you get the government to do anything, to make any change? You have to advocate for it. You have to pester your representatives in government and try and get them to make those changes. But there is that bigger question of, can we actually play a role ourselves in fostering that development of understanding of the ocean and interest in the oceans ourselves? Perhaps that's a role for us.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Karen, for the answer. Because of we're running a bit short with time, we will just have one question for each speaker, but the rest of the questions will be posted in Huba, so please look up them and answer them directly. The next question is for Kemal. Sorry, for Maria Jose. Maria Jose, are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, good. Okay, super. The question is, how do you do and how successful is the dialogue and participation of different countries and interests for the management of migratory species?
Thank you very much for the question. Very interesting question. So I guess you need to keep in mind that RFMOs exist for many years. I mean, some of them have existed for more than 50, 60 years. So member countries have been meeting and negotiating for a long time. And given the complexity of managing highly migratory species in international waters, I think that countries at large have been relatively successful, at least managing the main commercial tuna and benthic species. Not perfect, but at large, I mean, there's participation and they're forced to talk to each other and they're forced to dialogue. So at least from ecological point of view, we can say that they've been successful at managing, and even recovering some of the large tuna and benthic species. But in terms of, if we look more at the socioeconomic aspects of fisheries, I think they have not been that good, because still there's a lot of inequalities, different access to resources, and I think countries have not been so successful there. So I think there is a need to keep foreseeing and creating more spaces for dialogue and participation, both at the scientific committee levels for scientists, but also spaces at the commission level. So people can discuss further and address the impacts of these fisheries on bycatch species on the broader ecosystem, but also look at the socioeconomic aspects of fisheries.
Great, thank you very much, Maria Jose. And the last question is for Kemal. Kemal, the question for you is, what are the social aspects of your approach? And have you engaged in here the local communities on the areas as well?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. So as I explained, at Transboundary area and the border of two countries, it is important to get ideas of stakeholders and what do they think on activities on each side. So for example, what a Spanish fisherman is thinking about offshore wind farms in France, because it will maybe affect also its fishing areas. So what we did was using the outputs of existing European Union projects on MSP in the area, which is actually just one SIMNORAD project. And in this work that we also participated, that they went and asked to fishermen and many activities their opinions and their concerns for the future. For example, the space conflict that I was explaining was one of the issues that we identified by the stakeholders. It was their opinion. So bottom fishery, trawling, etc. Like, for example, for Brexit, they were very concerned that many English fishermen could kind of come in the area or go in the area. How will be the governance of these kind of issues? So we use these opinions of stakeholders. Actually, the paper is published, so you may check and then read the paper for more detailed analysis. But we considered the stakeholders' opinion as this part of social part. But at the same time, like, the work was more focused on environmental and economic issues in the area.
Thank you, Kemal, for the answer, and thank you to all our speakers. The presentations were fantastic, and I hope you will